The explosion comes without warning. At 4:17 on a September morning in 1889, furnace number 7 at Carnegie's Edgar Thomson Steelworks erupts in a column of white-hot gas and molten iron that tears through the casting floor like the wrath of an angry god. The blast wave shatters windows 300 yards away. Men working the midnight shift, fathers, brothers, sons, are incinerated instantly or crushed beneath collapsing iron walkways. The roar shakes the earth. Then comes the screaming. Within 90 seconds, 121 men are dead or dying, their bodies scattered across the furnace floor like broken toys. The disaster at Edgar Thomson becomes the deadliest single industrial accident in American steel history, a catastrophe born not from misfortune, but from the systematic sacrifice of human life on the altar of profit. This is the story of how Andrew Carnegie's relentless pursuit of cost-cutting efficiency turned steelmaking into a death sentence for thousands of working men. This is the story of the blast furnace explosion that finally forced America to confront the human price of industrial progress. But to understand how 121 men die in less than 2 minutes, we must first understand the economic forces that place them in harm's way. The year is 1889, and America stands at the threshold of becoming the world's dominant industrial power. Steel is the foundation of this transformation. Steel for railroads that span continents, steel for bridges that conquer rivers, steel for buildings that scrape the sky. And no man dominates American steel production more completely than Andrew Carnegie, the Scottish immigrant who arrives penniless in Pennsylvania and builds an empire on molten iron and broken backs. Carnegie revolutionizes steel production through a system he calls vertical integration, controlling every stage of production from iron ore mines to finished steel rails. His Edgar Thomson Steel Works in Braddock, Pennsylvania, operates with ruthless efficiency, producing more steel at lower cost than any competitor. But Carnegie's greatest innovation is not technological, it is organizational. He drives production costs down by driving workers harder, by running furnaces hotter, by cutting corners on maintenance and safety. In Carnegie's world, a man is just another input in the production equation, no different from iron ore or limestone. When a worker dies, another hungry immigrant takes his place within hours. The supply of desperate labor is inexhaustible. Carnegie's profit margins in 1889 exceed $4 million, wealth beyond imagination. But this fortune is built on a foundation of industrial slaughter that claims lives every single day. If you're finding this documentary compelling, please consider subscribing to support our continued investigation into forgotten industrial disasters. The blast furnace at the heart of this catastrophe is a technological marvel and a death trap in equal measure. It stands 75 feet tall, a massive tower of brick and iron that dominates the Braddock skyline like a medieval fortress. Inside this tower, an alchemical transformation occurs. Iron ore, limestone, and coke are heated to temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, producing molten iron that flows like liquid fire. The process is continuous. The furnace operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for months or even years without stopping. To halt production is to lose profits, so the furnace is never allowed to cool. Men work in rotating shifts around this inferno, feeding raw materials into the top, while others tap molten iron from the bottom. The heat is unbearable. Workers collapse from dehydration regularly. Burns are so common they are not even reported. But the true danger is invisible. The blast furnace produces enormous quantities of carbon monoxide-rich gas as a byproduct. Blast furnace gas, or BFG. This gas is collected and used as fuel throughout the mill, piped through thousands of feet of cast iron conduit. The gas is toxic, explosive, and under constant pressure. A crack in a pipe, a failed valve, a moment of inattention, any of these can release a cloud of death. Carbon monoxide is odorless, colorless, and kills silently. Men working near a gas leak simply collapse and never wake. But BFG poses an even deadlier threat. When mixed with air in the right proportions, it becomes a fuel-air explosive more powerful than dynamite. The entire blast furnace complex is, in effect, a bomb that grows more unstable with every passing day. The dangers are not theoretical. They are proven in blood year after year, tragedy after tragedy. In 1885, Furnace B at Edgar Thomson experiences a slip where the column of material inside suddenly drops, causing a catastrophic release of hot gas that kills 3 workers instantly and injures 11 more. The incident receives 3 sentences in the Pittsburgh newspapers. Production resumes within hours. In 1887, a gas explosion at Carnegie's Homestead Works kills 4 men when a pipe rupture creates a fireball that consumes an entire work bay. The coroner rules the deaths accidental. No safety improvements are mandated. In 1888, a worker at Edgar Thomson is burned alive when molten iron splashes from a ladle onto the casting floor. His screams echo through the mill for 4 minutes before he dies. His name does not appear in company records. These are not isolated incidents. They are the routine cost of doing business in Carnegie's empire. In the 1880s, fatal accidents in Pittsburgh's steel mills account for 20% of all male deaths in the city. Think about that statistic. 1 in 5 men who die in Pittsburgh dies because of steel making. Newspapers publish weekly casualty lists as regularly as they publish stock prices. The lists grow longer each year as production accelerates. Carnegie's response to this carnage is instructive. He writes eloquent essays about the nobility of labor and the responsibility of wealth. But at his mills, he cuts costs by eliminating safety inspections, by delaying equipment maintenance, by punishing supervisors who slow production for safety concerns. His plant manager, Henry Clay Frick, is even more ruthless. Frick measures success in tons of steel produced per dollar of labor cost. Dead workers do not appear in that calculation. Leave a comment below if you have family history connected to Carnegie Steel or Pittsburgh industrial work. We're collecting stories for a follow-up documentary. The community surrounding Edgar Thomson Steel Works exists in a state of constant dread, a sword of Damocles hanging over every household. Braddock, Pennsylvania, is a company town in everything but name. Nearly every family has at least 1 member working at the mill. The children play in streets covered with metallic dust that settles from the sky like toxic snow. The women wash work clothes that are stiff with dried sweat and blood, knowing that each day their husbands and sons leave for work might be the day they do not return. The economic dependency is total and inescapable. There are no alternative employers, no safety net, no workers' compensation. When a man dies at the mill, his widow receives nothing, no pension, no death benefit, not even an apology. If she's lucky, the neighbors take up a collection. More often, she becomes destitute, forced to take in laundry or boarders to feed her children. The company sometimes offers the widow's eldest son a job at the mill that killed his father, doing the same work under the same dangerous conditions. This is presented as charity. The immigrants who comprise the majority of Carnegie's workforce are especially vulnerable. Hungarians, Poles, Slovaks, Italians, they arrive in America with dreams of prosperity and find themselves trapped in industrial hell. They speak little English, understand nothing of American law, and live in terror of deportation. When supervisors order them to perform obviously dangerous tasks, they comply without question. To refuse is to be fired, blacklisted, and quite possibly forced to return to the poverty they fled. The community knows the blast furnaces are accidents waiting to happen. The equipment at Edgar Thomson is aging. Furnace number 7 is the oldest in the complex, commissioned in 1875 and run continuously for 14 years without major overhaul. Its brick lining is cracked, its gas pipes are corroded, its safety valves are rusted and questionable. The workers see this deterioration every day. They report it to supervisors. They beg for maintenance shutdowns. Their concerns are dismissed. Production cannot be interrupted. The profits are too great. The night of September 28th passes like 1,000 others at Edgar Thomson. The midnight shift begins at 11. 140 men reporting for duty on the casting floor and around the cluster of blast furnaces that dominate the works. Furnace number 7 is running at maximum capacity, producing 200 tons of molten iron every 12 hours. The night supervisor is pushing for a production record. At 4:15 a.m., 2 workers notice that the pressure gauge on the main BFG line is fluctuating erratically. This is a warning sign that experienced furnace men recognize immediately, an indication that gas is escaping somewhere in the system, creating pressure imbalances. They report it to the shift foreman. He waves them away. The furnace cannot be shut down. At 4:16 a.m., a cast-iron gas pipe near the base of furnace number 7 cracks. The pipe is 3 decades old, corroded from the inside by years of exposure to hot sulfurous gas. The crack is only 4 inches long, but it releases blast furnace gas under tremendous pressure directly into the enclosed space of the casting floor. The gas is heavier than air. It sinks, spreads, fills the lower levels where men are working. They do not notice. Carbon monoxide has no smell, no taste, no warning. Within seconds, 20 workers in the immediate vicinity begin to lose consciousness, their brains starved of oxygen. Some collapse where they stand. Others stumble, confused, trying to reach fresh air. None make it more than a few steps. At 4:17 a.m., the accumulating cloud of blast furnace gas reaches a critical concentration and encounters an ignition source, possibly a spark from a grinding wheel, possibly a worker's torch, possibly simple static electricity. The explosion is instantaneous and devastating. The fuel-air detonation creates a pressure wave that propagates through the enclosed casting floor at thousands of feet per second. Men near the epicenter are simply torn apart by the blast pressure, their bodies dismembered before they can even process what is happening. The concussion wave radiates outward, shattering equipment, collapsing overhead walkways, launching debris at lethal velocity. A worker stationed 60 feet from the initial explosion is killed when a flying piece of machinery strikes him with the force of a cannonball. The explosion ignites everything flammable: wood scaffolding, oil reservoirs, workers' clothing. The casting floor becomes an inferno. Molten iron, disturbed by the blast, spills from ladles and crucibles, creating streams of liquid metal that flow across the floor at 2,000 degrees, incinerating everything they touch. Men who survived the initial explosion are burned alive as they try to escape. The smoke is toxic and thick. Visibility drops to 0 within seconds. Workers stumble blindly, disoriented, lungs searing with each breath. Many collapse and are trampled by panicked survivors trying to reach exits. The entire catastrophic sequence, from the initial gas leak to the inferno that consumes the casting floor, takes less than 3 minutes. 121 men are killed. 19 more are injured so severely they will never work again. The destruction does not end with the explosion itself. The blast compromises the structural integrity of furnace number 7, creating a danger that threatens the entire complex. Molten iron inside the furnace begins to escape through cracks in the damaged lining, creating rivers of liquid metal that flow into areas where workers are attempting rescue operations. The heat is so intense that steel beams warp and collapse. The entire 75-foot furnace tower is in danger of catastrophic failure, which would release hundreds of tons of molten iron in a single devastating flood. The plant engineer makes the agonizing decision to evacuate the entire facility, abandoning victims who might still be alive in the wreckage. For 6 hours, Edgar Thomson Steelworks is a ghost town, its furnaces still roaring but unmanned, while company officials and town leaders assess the magnitude of the disaster. When rescue crews finally enter the casting floor at mid-morning, what they find defies description. Bodies are scattered across an area the size of a football field. Some are burned beyond recognition. Others are crushed beneath fallen machinery. Many show no external injuries at all, victims of carbon monoxide poisoning who appear to be sleeping. The identifying of the dead takes days. Many of the victims are recent immigrants whose names exist in no official record. Their bodies are claimed by grieving families based on clothing, pocket watches, or distinctive scars. At least 15 victims are never positively identified. They are buried in a mass grave in Braddock Cemetery, marked only with a simple stone that reads, "Unknown Workers, Carnegie Steel, September 1889. The injured present their own horror. 19 men survive the explosion but suffer burns over more than 60% of their bodies. In 1889, there is no treatment for such injuries. They die slowly over the following weeks, screaming for mercy in hospital beds. Their deaths are not included in the official toll of 121, a statistical sleight of hand that minimizes the true scope of the catastrophe. The final count settles at 121 confirmed dead, 19 mortally wounded, and 34 injured survivors. The youngest victim is 15 years old, a water boy who carried drinks to furnace workers. The oldest is 63, a maintenance worker who had survived 40 years in the mills only to die within sight of retirement. 16 of the dead leave behind widows and children. The funerals stretch across 2 weeks, overwhelming Braddock's churches and funeral homes. The procession for the mass burial of unidentified workers extends for half a mile. Hundreds of grim-faced mourners following horse-drawn wagons that carry plain coffins to unmarked graves. Andrew Carnegie is not in attendance. He is vacationing at his estate in Scotland when news of the explosion reaches him. His response, conveyed through a terse telegram, expresses regret and authorizes a payment of $100 to the family of each deceased worker, approximately 1 month's wages. This is not compensation. It is not a death benefit. Carnegie frames it as a charitable contribution, a generous gesture that acknowledges no liability whatsoever. For families who have lost their primary breadwinner, $100 represents perhaps 6 weeks of survival before destitution sets in. Many families never receive even this pittance. Widows of immigrant workers who cannot produce marriage certificates or birth records for their children are denied payment. The company claims it cannot verify their relationship to the deceased. The memorial tone of these funerals is undercut by the presence of company agents who photograph attendees, creating a record of workers who might be troublemakers or union sympathizers. Even in grief, the community exists under surveillance, a reminder that Carnegie Steel's power extends beyond the mill gates into every aspect of workers' lives. The investigations that follow the Edgar Thomson disaster are masterpieces of deflection and obfuscation. The Allegheny County coroner conducts an inquest, calling dozens of witnesses and examining the wreckage. His conclusion, delivered 6 weeks after the explosion, places blame on an act of God. an unforeseen equipment failure that no reasonable safety precaution could have prevented. This conclusion is preposterous on its face. The corroded gas pipe that caused the initial leak had been visibly deteriorating for years. Workers had filed written complaints about it. Supervisors had documented the problem in maintenance logs. Carnegie Steel management had simply chosen not to repair it because shutting down the furnace for maintenance would have cost tens of thousands of dollars in lost production. But the coroner's inquest is not designed to establish truth. It is designed to shield Carnegie from legal liability. The county prosecutor announces that no criminal charges will be filed. He cites the difficulty of establishing corporate responsibility for what he characterizes as an industrial accident. Pennsylvania law in 1889 makes it virtually impossible to hold company owners personally liable for workplace deaths. The legal doctrine of assumption of risk holds that workers accept the dangers inherent in their employment simply by showing up for work. If a job is obviously dangerous and a worker chooses to do it anyway, he bears responsibility for his own injury or death. This legal framework transforms victims into volunteers, men who supposedly walk into infernos of their own free will. The civil lawsuits filed by victims' families are dismissed or settled for nominal amounts. Carnegie Steel's attorneys argue that the workers were negligent in their duties, that they failed to follow safety procedures, that they should have detected the gas leak before it became catastrophic. The fact that the company provided no gas detectors, no safety training, and no emergency procedures is deemed irrelevant. Why does this pattern repeat year after year, on disaster after disaster, with no meaningful change? The answer is brutally simple. Industrial death is profitable. For Carnegie and his fellow steel barons, worker safety is an expense that directly reduces profitability. Every dollar spent on equipment maintenance, safety training, or protective gear is a dollar not available to shareholders. Every hour of production lost to safety inspections is an hour not producing steel. The economic incentives are perfectly aligned to maximize danger. Carnegie's business model depends on producing steel at lower cost than any competitor. This cost advantage comes not from superior technology, but from relentless cost-cutting in every operational area. Safety is the easiest cost to cut because the consequences are borne entirely by workers, not by management or shareholders. When a furnace explodes and kills 100 men, Carnegie Steel's stock price does not fall. Contracts are not canceled. Customers do not switch to competitors. The company pays a modest settlement to some victims' families, makes superficial safety improvements that placate public outcry, and then returns to business as usual. Within weeks, the Edgar Thomson Works is operating at full capacity again, the bloodstains scrubbed from the casting floor, new immigrants hired to replace the dead. The explosion has caused no meaningful disruption to Carnegie's profit margins. In fact, by depressing local wages, desperate widows and orphans create a surplus of available labor willing to work for less. The disaster may actually improve the company's bottom line. This is not conspiracy. This is capitalism functioning exactly as designed, allocating resources according to incentives without regard for human cost. What would you do if you discovered your workplace was as dangerous as Carnegie's mills? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone. The legacy of the Edgar Thomson blast furnace explosion is complex and deeply frustrating. In the immediate aftermath, there is tremendous public outcry. Newspaper editorials denounce Carnegie as a robber baron with blood on his hands. Religious leaders give sermons condemning the worship of profit over human life. Labor organizers use the disaster as evidence that workers need union protection and government regulation. And then, slowly, the outrage fades. Within 6 months, the story disappears from newspapers. Within a year, and the disaster is forgotten by everyone except the families of the dead and the survivors who wake screaming from nightmares of fire and smoke. But the explosion does plant seeds that eventually bear fruit. The disaster contributes to growing momentum for industrial safety regulation, a movement that gains strength in the 1890s and finally achieves federal legislation with the creation of the Bureau of Mines in 1910, and later the Occupational Safety and Health Administration in 1970. The disaster also strengthens the labor movement. Workers at Carnegie Mills become more willing to risk joining unions to demand safer working conditions, even when doing so means facing termination or violence from company guards. The 1892 Homestead Strike, though ultimately crushed with the loss of 10 more lives, demonstrates that workers will fight back against the industrial death machine. The Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers uses the memory of the Edgar Thomson explosion in organizing campaigns, reminding workers that the company will kill them with indifference if they don't organize to protect themselves. Most importantly, the disaster leaves a memorial. Not the kind carved in stone, but the kind written in blood on the pages of history. The 121 men who died in the September 1889 explosion at Edgar Thomson are martyrs to industrial progress, human sacrifices offered on the altar of American economic development. Their names deserve to be remembered: Istvan Nagy, Anton Kowalski, Giuseppe Martinelli, Patrick O'Brien, and Joseph Novak, and 116 others whose names are lost to history, known only to God and the families who mourned them. These men built America. They melted the iron that became the rails that connected a continent. They forged the steel that became the bridges and buildings of a rising superpower, and they died doing it, killed by the greed of men who never stood close enough to a blast furnace to feel its heat. If this documentary has moved you, please subscribe and share it widely. These stories matter, these lives matter, and we have a responsibility to remember. The fight for workplace safety is not over. Workers still die in industrial accidents every day. The names change, the industries change, but the fundamental dynamic remains. Companies prioritize profit over human life until forced to do otherwise by regulation, on litigation, or worker organization. The 121 men of Edgar Thomson paid the ultimate price to teach us this lesson. The question is whether we have learned it,